In a world of equestrian glamour, a dark secret hides in plain sight.
What goes on, they just turn a blind eye to it.
When 21-year-old showjumper Katie Simpson is found dead in a house in Derry, her family and friends are told the cause was suicide.
Katie was mad for horses, full of mischief.
But that verdict never sat right with some, not when Jonathan Creswell was in the picture.
He was very, very charming, very kind of hypnotic.
There was an arrogance there.
Unbelievably cocky.
In the aftermath of Katie's tragic death, a small circle of brave women go to battle against a system that initially failed Katie, revealing the horrifying secrets she'd spent her short life keeping.
He was holding her there against her will.
They could see how he was treating her.
The beatings got so much worse.
He was controlling Katie.
What they uncover will shock their community and land Jonathan Creswell in court for murder.
I've never had somebody sit in an interview room and say that, ever.
This is Groomed, an investigative series from Crime World presents. A chilling tale of betrayal and complicity, exposing a monster who seemed untouchable, and the enduring quest for justice in the face of overwhelming fear.
None of it made sense, but that didn't mean it wasn't true.
Groomed, coming soon, wherever you get your podcasts. Chapter 2, Golden-Haired Boy. By the time he rode into Tynan Village, Johnny Creswell was exactly the type of young man Horse Sport Ireland, the semi-state body set up to develop Ireland's booming equestrian industry, would identify as a career equestrian. From Derry, he had been immersed in the industry from an early age, was uninterested in school and had dropped out of education. His ambition was to work full-time in the yards and stables where he had spent his childhood. He wanted to first apprentice as a jockey and then make the trajectory into trainer and owner, ultimately eyeing up his own stables and stud. His timing was excellent. What would have once been seen as a dead-end job as a farmhand had become a role brimming with promise in an industry on a gold rush. Horse Sport Ireland had just been established with the aim of growing equestrian sport and promoting Ireland internationally as a place for horse breeding, leisure horse riding and training. Horse Racing Ireland had reported growth for consecutive years, and 2006 was a record year at the racetracks. 1.4 million people had attended racing events despite competition from the World Cup and Ryder Cup, and 15 cancelled meetings due to bad weather. Additionally, Ireland had celebrated 10 winners at Cheltenham, including the prestigious Gold Cup, the Champion Hurdle and the Champion Chase. In his fact book that year, Brian Kavanagh, Chief Executive of Horse Racing Ireland, reported a 31% growth in bloodstock sales at public auction, 191 million, a 10% growth in on-course betting, 262 million, and a growth of 5% in prize money, 55 million. There's a broad consensus that the current prize money levels have helped to encourage owners and trainers to buy the best horses, keep them in training in Ireland and compete in the top races at home and abroad. This in turn provides employment throughout the regions and helps us to retain and build an unequalled equine skills base, Kavanagh said. Creswell's route to his first apprenticeship at Dartonry Yard in the heart of Tynan Village was a typical one for many young jockeys. He had horses in his blood and from an early age had been riding ponies and competing in show jumping events. While he was not a natural in the saddle, he had the determination to hang on for dear life, no matter what the terrain or speed. And that had made him an excellent huntsman and well-regarded show jumper, but neither would pay the bills. To take his first tentative steps to a proper career, he needed to apprentice so that he could race point to points across Ireland in the major and smaller events that were staged every week. Born to a single mother in January 1988, he had started life in a city fraught with tension and violence. His birth came just days before a planned march to remember the Bloody Sunday atrocity, which had left an indelible mark on his native Derry. Even 16 years on from the horrors of the ill-fated Civil Rights March, RUC patrols and blocks surrounded Derry in the run-up to the planned remembrance marches, and security was tight. Donna Creswell was still only a teenager when she made her way through the chaos to Altnagelvin Hospital to give birth to what would be her only child. There were stories around Donna's pregnancy and whispers about her liaison with Herbie Lusby, a wealthy landowner for whom she had been working as a farm labourer on his vast property outside the town. Lusby was married with a young son and daughter, and the announcement of the pregnancy had caused some tension in both homes. But the arrival of the baby had quelled that, particularly at Donna's, where he was doted on in a house full of adults, and where his grandparents, James and Sandra, stepped in to help rear him, while his uncles and aunt, Alan, Gordon, Richard and Caroline, were on hand to help Donna get back on her feet. Tensions were high in Northern Ireland, and in the months after his birth, the news was dominated by high-profile events, including the killing of the Gibraltar Three, Daniel McCann, Sean Savage and Mairead Farrell by the SAS. In March at Milltown Cemetery, at the funeral of the three, loyalist Michael Stone used pistols and grenades to attack the mourners, killing 3 people and wounding 60. Much of the attack was filmed by TV cameras. Days later, at the funeral of Kevin Brady, one of the 3 shot by Stone, 2 British Army corporals were surrounded and later shot dead after driving a car into the funeral procession. By May, the Provisional IRA had taken their fight to the Netherlands, where 3 members of the Royal Air Force were killed. A month later, 6 off-duty soldiers died when an IRA bomb exploded their van. Later that month, a helicopter was shot from the sky in Armagh by a unit of the South Armagh Brigade. On the political stage, the ongoing targeting of British security personnel had led to a huge clash between the Irish Taoiseach Charles Haughey and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who accused the Gardaí of being less than professional while the IRA plotted atrocities in the Republic. During a heated meeting, Thatcher had warned Haughey that her one objective was to beat the IRA. "I will never be prepared to walk out and let the terrorists win." Later that year marked the 20th anniversary of the 1968 Civil Rights March. Among those that took part in the Memorial March were leading Sinn Féin officials Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. Security along the route of the march was tight, but the RUC prevented loyalists planning a counter-demonstration. The outspoken Democratic Unionist Party leader, Reverend Ian Paisley, who had travelled to Derry with many of his supporters, was involved in angry exchanges, and he claimed he was pushed from a police Land Rover as he tried to wave a Union Jack. At home, the Creswell family had a lot to be thankful for. Outside was undoubtedly a strange and dangerous place, but inside the house, baby Johnny, with his blonde hair and rosy cheeks, had brought the family a sense of joy, in stark contrast to the constant grim narrative of day-to-day life. As he grew, the atrocities continued across Armagh, Fermanagh, Down and Tyrone, but in 1993, when he was just 5, the war took a shocking turn and the violence came frighteningly close to home. In October, the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, using the cover name Ulster Freedom Fighters, claimed responsibility for a gun attack on the Rising Sun Bar in Greysteel, in which 8 civilians were killed and 12 wounded. In a country in the grip of a war, when murders were commonplace, the attack stood out for the crass shouts of one gunman who yelled "trick or treat" before spraying the crowded room, a reference to a Halloween party that was taking place. The UFF would claim that the horror shootings were in revenge for the Shankle Road bombings days earlier, when 9 people were killed when an IRA bomb exploded prematurely at a fish shop. People lived in fear, and every day more were traumatised by the history playing out on their streets. In the yards and the stables surrounding Derry, there was a sense of distance from the terrorism, and Donna was keen to introduce her child to horses as soon as she could. While chaos and upheaval was never far away, where the wealthy gathered, it seemed life was almost untouched by the violence and rioting that engulfed the vast estates of Derry like Cregan and the Bogside. As soon as he was old enough, Donna enrolled Johnny at the Pony Club at Eglinton Equestrian Club in Derry, where he quickly took to the sport. A lively and boisterous boy, he showed no fear of the ponies or bigger horses that trotted about the large yards and arenas. At weekends, he'd be schooled in riding and jumping, and he often went with his mother to muck out or feed the horses after school and during long summer holidays. Peace was finally on the horizon, and there was a sense of opportunity in the air. By the time the Good Friday Agreement was signed on the 10th of April 1998, Johnny was 10 years old and well on his way to being one of Northern Ireland's success stories, a child born into the worst of the Troubles, but one looking at a far more stable and secure future. In fact, he was so good at handling a pony that he was handpicked by Aldith Rulston to ride her champions, which regularly competed at showjumping Ireland events. Aldith was extremely successful at breeding ponies, but she'd no children herself. Many people believed that young Johnny was her own son. She doted on him so much, and he spent so much time with her, travelling and performing in the RDS and other venues. Aldith, many said, had him ruined. He'd learned from the best and had enjoyed the best of everything available to a rider from such a young age. The most expensive tack and riding gear, the best ponies and first-class transport and stabling. The relationship eventually turned sour when Aldith and Donna fell out, but by that point, Creswell was already a name in showjumping circles and was about to move on to eventing. While Johnny was prospering in the saddle, schooling had evaded him. He was not good at reading or writing and struggled to keep up in the classroom. Although his father had not been a steady presence in his life, Herbie Lusby had kept a watching eye over his love child and had helped out financially and encouraged him in his love of riding. Lusby was unconventional in every way, but he was known as a decent and a generous man. He was 40 years old when his brief affair with Donna had led to her pregnancy, but he'd weathered the gossip and tried to keep his own family together. Lusby was from a large family and he'd been born and bred on the land. His father, Noel, had worked hard for success after inheriting from his own father, Herbert, a small holding of 20 acres on which he grazed 20 cattle on the waterside in Derry. The story went that the Lusbys were from wealthy Catholic stock who'd been pillaged and run out of England and who'd come to Derry to start again. Noel was hard-working and doubled his farm to 40 acres, later, along with his wife Anne, extending it to an impressive 340 acres. Along with their 9 children, they travelled the country to attend shows, including the RDS agriculture event in Ballsbridge in Dublin, where they displayed their livestock. It was the Ayrshire breed that brought Noel to prominence, but he turned his skills to the French limousine, large beef cattle with a bright tan coat. He knew the importance of representative bodies and funding and would eventually become chair of the Northern Ireland Cattle Club. Many of the Lusby children had followed Noel into farming, including Herbie, who developed an interest in breeding himself, in particular Appaloosa ponies. He was farming at a time when British soldiers often hid, camouflaged and armed around his land near Beara Hill. He was known to have no time for them or for British occupation, and he supported Catholic youth schemes as community leaders tried to teach them skills and trades. Herbie Lusby had been very well placed when developers came calling with an offer for his land. The entire development and growth of Derry had been controlled by a gerrymandered council since his own father Noel farmed the land, building up a huge cattle herd, which had given Herbie a decent start in life. His own lands were located beside the old US military camp known as Springtown, which had been central to the rise of the civil rights movement. In the 1940s, poor Catholic families, desperate for a roof over their heads, had broken into the old camp and taken up residence in the tin huts. For years, the unionist-controlled city council had charged them rent and promised them they would be housed in proper homes in the city. But the housing never materialised and conditions deteriorated, as the council feared that moving Catholics to other areas would affect their votes in local elections. When the residents eventually took their demands in a silent protest to Derry's Guildhall, the council was forced to move them, an event which in turn led to the establishment of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. The springtime families were largely rehoused in the huge Cregan estate built in the 1950s. But the Unionist Council made sure that the Catholics were corralled together into one electoral ward, which included Cregan, the Bogside and the Brandywell districts, so they couldn't get a foothold in local politics. As the population grew, the huge Catholic area of the Cregan spread northwards towards a housing estate known as the Glen, which had been mainly allocated to the families of RUC officers and the notorious B Specials, who began to move out. When the Troubles erupted in 1969, the outflow of the Protestant population continued, becoming a flood after Bloody Sunday. As the Troubles continued throughout the 1970s, the Catholic population continued to spread northwards, edging ever closer to the significant holdings of land owned by Lusby. By the 1980s, the old Londonderry Council had been renamed Derry City Council, and there were significant numbers of Catholics in well-paid employment in big companies. Derry also had a second generation of university-educated professionals, including teachers, and a growing middle class who wanted out of the Cregan and Bogside areas, but who were still uncomfortable about taking up residence in the Protestant Waterside area. There was still more than a decade of low-intensity conflict to run until the Provisional IRA ceasefire was called in August 1994, so land on the city's west bank became much sought after. Lusby had cashed in his chips to developers who'd planned and were set to build hundreds of new semi-detached and detached houses and bungalows on what had been his farm. The development would become known as the Foyle Springs Housing Estates. At the same time, a rare property came up for sale near the shores of the River Foyle on the Donegal-Tyrone border. Lusby snapped it up, seeing it as the ideal location to build a new business around horses. Port Hall was a stunning old country house built in the mid-1700s and described on the Buildings of Ireland website as an impressive and sophisticated, small-scale Palladian country house, arguably the finest building of its type and date in Donegal. Port Hall had history. Just like Castle Leslie, Tynan Abbey and Caledon Estate, it was a throwback to a time of colonialism when the rich and privileged few lived in big houses. Port Hall had been built for Judge John Vaughan, who served as a grand juror to Donegal, and it remained in his family until 1791, at which point it was let out. During the 19th century, it was in the ownership of the Clark family, who held 273 acres at the site. A British lawyer, Anthony Morecco, owned it from the 1950s until the 1980s. He was involved in the trials of former Nazis at Nuremberg and was a founding member of Amnesty International. He carefully repaired and renovated the house during his time there. By the time Lusby moved to Donegal, he was intent on creating a viable business that he could hand down to his eldest son, Daniel. Together they set about developing Port Hall into a prestigious stud farm with varied equestrian offerings such as pony club classes and breeding and training facilities. But he'd also kept in touch with Donna and with his son's blossoming career. Jonathan had chosen an expensive sport. By 2001, when he was 13, Creswell was riding at Lenamore Stables in Muff, County Donegal, regularly placing first and clearing rounds. Lenamore, on the border of Donegal and Derry, was one of the most impressive equestrian centres in the area. It had been developed by Geraldine Graham, who had turned her father's dairy farm into a riding school, livery yard and breeding centre. In June of that year, he placed first 6 times in Limavady, Lenamore Stables and at AJS promotions events. His record continued throughout the year, and that August he placed first at the National Pony and Yearling Championships. In October, he placed 6th at Cavan Equestrian Centre, south of the border, and in November he retired in the first round, but at all other events he was highly successful. In 2002, Donna was listed as the owner of Sparkling Rossnashane, a bay mare with her son listed as the jockey. Over the course of that year, his record continued and he placed first at a National Pony and Young Rider Championships. By 2003, Johnny had dropped out of school and was riding almost full-time on Geraldine Graham's Lenamore Lady Luck, placing first 15 times throughout Derry and Donegal shows, and also on Lenamore Deja Vu. Although he was only 15 years old, Johnny brimmed with alpha male confidence, both in and out of the saddle. In the yard, he was assertive and dominated conversations, often roughhousing with the other stable hands. He'd also developed a crude narrative when it came to women, and often made inappropriate remarks to them, but his self-assured demeanour made him appear older than his years, and he also knew exactly how to turn on the charm. Despite being older by 8 years, jockey Jill Robinson found herself drawn to the teenage horseman in a way that astounded both her and those who knew her. Robinson was well respected in the industry and highly sought after by trainers and owners for her skills. She came from Omagh in County Tyrone and was a key organiser of the town's annual agricultural and horse show. She was also active in the Tyrone Farming Society and known for her organisational and administrative skills, as well as her equestrian abilities. She was pretty too, blonde with sparkling blue eyes, and an athletic figure honed by years in the saddle. While she could have had her pick of men, Robinson was enthralled by the teenager with the ruddy cheeks, and by the time he turned 16, the pair were an item. Neither Johnny nor Jill cared what people said about them and the significant age gap between them, and they made no secret of the fact they were in a romantic relationship. While the natural order would suggest that, given her maturity, Jill should have held the balance of power in the relationship, it was Johnny who was regularly heard chastising her, often in front of their peers, while he continued to make waves on horseback as he confidently improved his form. In 2005, he was ranked in the Youth Continental Regional Championships at Saumur in France on the horse Nice Revan. He rode Ballydown at Nacarn Castle and again at Tattersalls in 2006. That same year, aged 18, he was named as the third reserve on Ireland's Junior European Championships team, the closest he would ever get to international sporting fame. Like many keen horsemen, show jumping had been Johnny's first love, and it was through eventing and the social life that went with it that he had made connections and gained an understanding of the business. He'd travelled throughout Northern Ireland and across the border for almost a decade, competing over jumps. But when he rode his first point-to-point at Torella, County Down, a year later, he got hooked on the speed and the sheer rush of the race. Point-to-point had emerged in the late 1800s as hunts in both Ireland and England organised their own race meetings and steeplechasing became more popular. By now it was seen as a starting point for young jockeys like Johnny, who dreamed of glory at Cheltenham, Aintree or Galway, and who realised that there was no money in show jumping. Those who knew where Johnny's true skills lay when it came to horse riding could see why point-to-point, high-speed races over jumps would suit him. He was not an elegant rider and sat awkwardly on a horse, but he could hold on no matter what was thrown at him. He was brave and got a kick out of the speed and the thunder of the race. Injuries from falls were often career-ending for jockeys, but Johnny's habit of hanging on no matter what would stand to him. A career as a jockey meant two things. Johnny needed an apprenticeship and a reputable yard to work at, and he also needed to keep his weight down to under 9 stone, something that would require discipline and self-control, early mornings, long days and late nights. He started to look for opportunities, and when his on-off girlfriend Jill Robinson told him there was an opening at a stables in Armagh, he jumped at the chance of getting out of Derry and the family home and moving full-time to the village of Tynan in 2008. Jill was a hard worker and had impressed the Gillespie family, who owned the stables. They knew that any jockey she recommended would be good for their business and an asset to the stables. Jill was already an accomplished and busy jockey, and at Tynan was hoping to get experience in breeding and training. For Creswell, the calibre of horses at Tynan was a big draw, but he hoped that there would also be plenty of extra work in the nearby estates of Caledon and Castle Leslie, where there were still horses that needed to be exercised and where casual work would supplement his income. Darton Rees Stables in Tynan was established by Dr. Fitz Gillespie at the back of his medical practice, which for decades had served the village and the surrounding areas. The horse-mad doctor lived in a sprawling whitewashed house directly opposite Tynan Church, where Sir Norman Strong had preached before his terrible death, and for years he'd treated patients in one of his living rooms. Dr. Gillespie's own father had run the Tynan surgery, and Fitz, short for Fitzroy, had attended Trinity College, Dublin, where he'd met his wife Barbara, also a doctor. The couple returned to Tynan in 1964 after old Dr. Gillespie's death and worked together and raised their 3 children, Gail, Patrick and Rollo. 30 years after their return, the couple moved the practice from their home to premises at the newly renovated village school. When he wasn't attending the sick or elderly, Dr. Gillespie loved nothing better than to spend time with his horses. He bought land and built stables and started to breed horses in his spare time. By 1971, his horse Duplate won the local fixture at Farmacafley. Fitz, as he was known outside the surgery, was an avid huntsman, and with his status in the community, became the chairman of the Tynan and Armagh Hunt, established hundreds of years before by the Strong family. He became a senior member of the Turf Club of Ireland, and by 1992 was celebrating when his horse Repeat the Dose, which he'd bred at Tynan, won at the Cathcart Chase at the famous Cheltenham Festival. Other horses sired at his yard included Blue Alliance and Bahia de Palma. When his children came of age, they all became involved in the growing business. But it wasn't just the Gillespies who were proud of the horses and their achievements. The whole village adored them, and many came out to watch in the mornings as the riders and horses paraded through the streets before making their way to the fields for exercise. In a way, the riders were looked up to as much as the horses, idolised like rock stars. And when the handsome Johnny came to town, he made many young female hearts flutter.